Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today's webinar on designing programs to create a quality experience. My name is Jennifer Peltier, and I'm the Education and Training Coordinator at Parks and Recreation Ontario, and I'm going to be your technical host for this morning. So just before we get started, I want to make sure that everybody can hear me nice and clear. So at the top of your screen, there's a little person icon there with their hand raised. If you want to go ahead and click on that, and that should raise your hand for you so that I know that you can hear me loud and clear. Look at that. Perfect. Great. Glad to see. Well, I'm really appreciative that you're able to join us this morning. I know it's Friday, and the lovely weather that we're having in Toronto, so it's great to have everybody here on today's webinar. And just before we begin, I can see that lots of you have already checked into the chat pod to the right. In today's presentation, if you have any questions, whether it be for our speaker, Sarah, or for myself regarding any technical assistance, you can feel free and type in there. There will be some opportunities throughout. Sarah will take a moment or two to ask if there are any questions. Otherwise, if we do have a question that we don't get to in today's presentation, because it is a lot of content for an hour, then Sarah's been kind enough to agree to respond to those questions, and we'll send that out to the group afterwards, so nothing's missed. Another question that did come up just prior by John, will the recording be made available to the attendees? And yes, they will have access to the recording, and you will have also access to the slide deck itself, and we'll send that out after as well. So I don't want to take up too much time doing the intro, so I just want to start off by welcoming Sarah Galsworthy. She has been involved with sport and recreation for more than 20 years and has experience with multi-sport games, volunteers, and kids sport, and is a master trainer with HighFive. Sarah now works in injury prevention at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center, where she brings her sport and recreation background to the medical table. Sarah is a creative thinker and a passionate trainer and expertise in youth leadership development and safety awareness. Sarah's skills is intercultural relations and out-of-the-box ideas and implementation make her a valuable skills provider for organizations. So I'm very excited and pleased to have her with us today on the call, and please join me in welcoming Sarah in the chat pod. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I always feel that during the introductions, I need to do a better job of I'm doing the things I say I'm supposed to be doing. So thanks for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. You can feel free, like Jennifer said, type your questions in the side, and I'll try to break as much as I can, as we go to answer those questions. And if I don't get to your questions, Jennifer and I will certainly follow up with everybody afterwards. And I really want to encourage you to ask questions, as this is very content-heavy material. We've got about, I don't know, maybe 3 hours of material to present to you today, and I'm going to try to do it in a high-level way. So please be patient with me if I do skip through a few slides. You will have all the information there that you can follow up with later. So thanks very much, everyone. I'm sitting in my very muggy office, and for those of you who've never met me, I'm gorgeous, so you know what I look like. So just know that you have a gorgeous person on the other end talking to you. So why are we here today talking about quality experience in physical literacy and why it's important? And the interesting thing is I sit at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center, and physical literacy is injury prevention. We have thousands of people walking through our door every day getting treated from totally preventable diseases, and a lot of them come from the fact that they're not active enough, and they just don't have those physical literacy skills to get out there and be active. And that's why we're relying and we're asking for the sport and recreation community to help us out a little bit. So today I'm kind of coming to you from an injury prevention perspective, as well as a trainer for Sport for Life. So this physical literacy now in this plan program is a project funded through the Ontario Sport and Recreation Community Fund. The Plan of Physical Activity Now is a project presented by partner agencies. So you heard Jennifer from Parks and Recreation Ontario, Canada Sport for Life, which is me, and I already explained to you a little bit about the funding coming from Ontario Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. So thank you to the ministry for this. The project was funded to help more people understand the concepts of physical literacy in sport and recreation, and to see that concepts more intentionally applied to the program. And I think throughout the day, if I could have you take anything away from this presentation, is that we need to do a better job of doing this with intent. And for any of you, our HighFive trainers out there, we talk a lot about the principle of friendship and creating environments for children to thrive and make friends. And we need to do that with intent. And it's the same with physical literacy. Children need to have environments where they can experience in a positive way the ability to move their own bodies. So what are we going to learn today, and what have I been hired to talk to you about? So these are some of the high-level objectives for our day. Basically, we need to have an understanding of what physical literacy is. We need to really get our heads around that and to understand that this is a very new conversation that we're having here in Canada. So congratulations to all of you for being on the line and being some of the first people to graduate towards this movement. So we need to understand what it is. We need to understand its role in the greater good of our population and the health of all Canadians and all Canadian children. And again, it's really important that we do this with intent. In injury prevention, the sport community, we talk about this. We talk about sitting is the new smoking. And we're seeing such negative effects that we sit so long. And if you think about your day, your commute into work, I live and work in Toronto, or live outside of Toronto and commute in, and I sit for a majority of my day, and it really does have an impact on our health. So something we really need to start to consider and make sure we do a better job for the children that are coming behind us. We're going to talk today about designing programs to create a quality experience. So how to look at our programs and how can we take the amazing programs that you already have and take it to the new level. We're not here to tear apart the work that you're doing. We're here to look at it and sort of how can we get it to that next level for our children. Quality experience really results from understanding the basics of physical literacy and doing this with intention, incorporating them into our program design, putting them into our goals and objectives, into our learning objectives. Because we know for sure that when you plan it, it's going to occur. And when you plan it, it occurs, and then we get better results. And that's the whole point of this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the elements of quality experience and how to put those into your programs. So physical literacy's roles in a quality experience. Emphasizing physical literacy is a critical component of any quality program, and it's important delivery in quality experiences. And you're going to see this phrase a lot. We're just not looking for great experiences and good experiences. We're looking at quality experiences. And from my work with sport and recreation, I can assure you what a good experience looks like in a program and what a quality experience is very, very different. And I'll give you this example. If you have your parents or any community parents come to your programs and you have children interacting and smiling and moving around and listening and behaving themselves, and there's no grass or there's no glass in the grass and it's a safe space for these kids, parents are really happy with that program because it looks really great and it looks like the kids are interacting and having a really good time. But we know now that these programs aren't necessarily quality. Are your kids getting the amount of physical activity that we need them to get? And are they in an environment where they can learn how to move their bodies and the words attached to moving those bodies? So the next few slides are going to provide more information about really what physical literacy is. Sarah's asking if you're going to see the slides. Jennifer, I'm not sure if we're going to share the slides. You can, Jennifer can answer that question on the side there. I'm sure that we can. So good physical and mental health, developing physical literacy is the key to providing quality experience. And so let's talk about how we're going to go ahead and do that. And it's going to start, I'm going to take you back to to your university or your college environments, maybe even high school. And we're going to go through a couple of slides so we can understand the content. This is a very new definition, and there's been a few definitions floating around, and this is the one that we have all decided to use here in Canada. So make sure you update your work to reflect this definition. The Canadian Consensus Group created this definition in 2015, so it's just a baby, and we're just really rolling it out now. So what is physical literacy? Physical literacy is the motivation, the confidence, the physical competence, knowledge of understanding to value and take responsibility for engaging in physical activities for life. We want our young people and ourselves to be active for life, and to do that we need to understand physical literacy. But there's a couple key pieces here that I think are really important. It's the motivation. Why do people get out and get active and why do some don't? Why do people like to play sports and go to rec programs and go to the gym and others do not? And a lot of that has to do with the confidence to be able to do that, creating environments for that confidence piece. We're looking at a holistic definition here. This goes far beyond fundamental movement skills and physical movement. And I think that's what it's really important. It's very much holistic. When I was training to be a physical education teacher, our design I was teaching a grade 9, 10, I was doing my practicum, I was being assessed, and I did a great job with the assessments, but what's interesting is when I look back on that time, we did a specific drill, and right into game. Skill, drill, and game. And did we really take a look at the environment in which we were creating? Did we really take a look at our children and the motivation for them to be there, the confidence that they had to do the things that we were asking? And did they have the physical literacy skills and the language, what we call movement vocabulary, to do these things? And I don't think that we did. So here's a little bit more about the consensus statement. It talks a little bit about 4 elements, which I kind of pulled through the definition on the previous slide. We're looking at the affective component, motivation and confidence, the physical component, cognitive component, which is really important, the knowledge and understanding, including the ability to identify and express the essential qualities that influences those movements, understanding the health bits, why is being active so important. A lot of times we say, we need people to be active. It's very, very important, but our public needs to understand why. And engaging in those physical activities for life, which is that behavior. What can we do to instill in our young people so they desire to move their bodies? I have a 3-and-a-half at home, and what can I do to create an environment to desire her to get off the couch and to motivate her to get off the couch and come and play with me outside, opposed to sit and watch that amazing thing that we call TV and screens that are doing such a good job of attracting our kids to them. So take a little bit to go ahead and you can go to the Sport for Life website, and there's tons of excellent resources there that can explain this in further for you. So here it is in sort of a graphic form for you, and I love this slide because it's really about doing a cartwheel. And I have to be honest with you, as a 41-year-old, I did a cartwheel not too long ago, and I think I'm still seeing stars. But physical literacy is truly the ability, the confidence, and the desire and motivation to be active for life. And how can we help these young people and ourselves get to this point? So let's talk a little bit about our environment in Canada. And there's a few things that we know to be sure. We have a very wise country. We have a very smart country. Children born into Canada today will most likely learn how to read and write. And for those of you who have children, if you look at the progression, they will get there. They all get there at their different levels and their different developmental needs, but they will all get there. So if you look at this slide here, we're looking at the environment in which our young people are raised into. And when we look at literacy, we look at all of our children start by learning the ABCs. Then they start by putting those ABCs into words and then sentences. And then from there, they can go on to write things like the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They could write a biography of their own life. They can write a letter to their favorite aunt and uncle that lives in another country. They can write a letter to a complete stranger. Social media right now is all up about writing letters to kids in other communities that might need some extra support, some positive reinforcement. And we make sure that all of our children learn the literacy. And it's the same with numeracy, understanding our numbers, understanding fractions, understanding what we need to do to get through our daily life. It's important that we understand that to survive every day. We use reading and math every single day. And it's the same when we look at music. We need to understand those scales. You need to know how to read scales so you can learn how to play the piano. And we put all of these pieces in absolute priority in our school system today. But yeah, the interesting thing is it sort of stops there. And physical literacy just sort of gets thrown to the wayside, those physical activity components. And I'll tell you, not too long ago, my niece was having some challenges in school. She's 6 and 7. She's 6, almost 7 years old. And the first thing that they do is they pull her recess and her activity time. They pull her PE class, which is only twice a week anyways, and they pull her from her recess to make her understand that her behavior was incorrect. And that just shows me that we still don't see physical literacy as a priority. We need our children to understand movement vocabulary, to understand what the terms are so they can put those into sequences and do dance ballet classes or perform high performance in a sport, or to be able to go golfing with their family or go for a hike with their family. And we need to switch this. We need to put physical literacy on the same level as all these other pieces. And it's starting. It's really, really starting. There are some school districts that are starting to put physical literacy as part of, as important as the other pieces. It's detrimental to the health of our young people. For the first time ever in Canada, I mean, Canada, we have such a beautiful place that we live here. And the average age to live is about 80 years old. And recently that actually dropped to 79 for the first time ever, and that's because the healthcare system just can't keep up with the crisis that we're fighting. So PL is one of the skill-based literacies. Just like we need to learn our ABCs and our 1, 2, 3s, we need to learn and understand fundamental movement skills, which you might refer to me throughout the presentation as calling it FMS. This is a learned process. It needs to be planned, it needs to be practiced, and it needs to be intentional. And I love my little Justin Bieber. I should probably change that at some point. You're probably all judging me as now. It's okay. I admit it. I love him. Okay, so let's keep going and talk a little bit about movement vocabulary and the languages that we use around movement. This slide is incredibly important. And it's important because it really talks about it's more than just developing those fundamental movement skills. Building a movement vocabulary and a better motor competence can lead to increased confidence in a participant. And we already know that increased confidence is one of the keys to physical literacy. It is also important that one has awareness while moving, that they can select an appropriate skill, movement at the right time, at the right place, and they can put those together. They can modify those activities and those skills to perform what we're asking them to perform. It also involves different environments, developing proficiency, comprehension, and awareness. And if we look at the slide, you'll see the word fitness underneath. And this is something I want to just spend a little bit of time explaining. You don't have to be the most fittest person in the world to be the most physically literate. They're actually very, very different things. Physical literacy and the level of fitness that we all have are actually separated. And the way we talk about it is physical literacy is the gateway to activity. And it leads to being active, and the more physical literacy, the more physically literate we are, the more active we can become. Now, if you put physical literacy, learning how to move our bodies, and the competence and confidence to do that, and you pair that with fitness, taking care of yourself, making sure you get your minimum required activity each day and week, you put those together, it creates durability, which allows your body to be less likely to be injured, to be better to manage stress, to be better to manage those times where you might not be making the best choices around food, to manage any sorts of those health challenges that many of us are faced with. So physical literacy is the gateway to activity, and if you put it together, then that's when we create durability, and that's really what we want to see. So I hope that makes sense, because I think sometimes we get confused between what physical literacy and fitness actually is, although they're very much married to one another. So the gateway to active participation, and this is where we talk about physical literacy as a journey. It's not a destination. We're not all trying to get to a location. We're trying to add physical literacy skills and be the most active and just continue to add to that and modify that as we go. If you look at, if each of you right now takes a second to look at your life and think about your life when you were a child. Where did you play? Who were you playing with? Who was supervising you? And think about your physical literacy. Think about all the skills that you knew how to do then, and all the skills that you were most likely proficient at: walking, jumping, leaping. And progress that to high school, and think about your life in high school. What kind of activities did you participate in? And did that change? Did your activity levels go up? Did your physical literacy skills? Did you learn more skills, or did it go down? And think about, and this is where it was a significant shift for me, think about when you went into, for those of you who went to university and college, how did that environment change? And then when you left university and college, and life happens, maybe injuries, car crashes, health issues, divorce. For me, for sure, it was children. Moving from British Columbia to Toronto for me changed the activity level for me, because all of a sudden now I'm sitting in the car. And my physical literacy, I wasn't adding any extra skills or practicing the physical literacy pieces that I already had. So it is a journey, and it ebbs and flows. And I think if we start to change the language around this, we're really going to affect our population. When I was a personal trainer many years ago, we used to respond to people as, what, you don't go to the gym? Why aren't you going to the gym? And we would have sort of this guilt and shaming on people that they would feel guilty that they don't go to the gym. And now it's more, let's look at your life and let's see how we can implement some activities. How can we get you out walking with your family? How can we change a few things? It's a very much a different conversation. So if you look at your own life and you kind of draw it out on a graph, you'll see that that line goes up and down and up and down, and it will continue to do so. So don't forget, this is a journey that we are on for the rest of our lives. Makes me want to get out there now, go for a walk. Okay, so learning physical literacy is like an ever-increasing cycle. So we have a visual here for us as I talk through this slide. It's all about the way we learn. As one participates in physical literacy, in a physical literacy experience, a quality program, as one participates, one gets feedback. And as one gains competence, one gets feedback. And one gains competence, one performs. So when we start to add these pieces, so you get experience, you're able to learn, you're learning how to move your body, you're learning how to be faster or slower, how to adjust yourself just by participating in a quality experience. And as you gain the confidence, you're going to be more likely to perform, to want to show others, to not be afraid to try an activity or to put yourself in a game. And we know when we put ourselves in games, and I'm not talking specific sport organized games, I'm talking lots of different games that we would see in a lot of our different environments, tag games, games on the playground, games in our recreation facilities. As we gain confidence, we have the ability to perform, to show off a little bit. And the cycle continues, and it's important as it goes round and round and round, and we constantly want to check in with what those pieces mean. The development, or this development, is a part of a quality experience, which means it needs to be reinforced, and we need to really understand this cycle. So I want to talk to you a little bit about HighFive. So are there any HighFive people out there? I don't know if you want to just let me know in the text in the chat slide if anybody is HighFive trainers or have taken the HighFive course at all. Just let me know. So these slides may be familiar to you. Oh, thanks. I see the yeses. Woohoo! And it's okay if you're not, but this is just a really good example of how this sort of message has aligned with another organization to get you to consider how your world can align with this movement. So Sport for Life alignment with HighFive. So Jennifer said in my generous opening is I am a master trainer with HighFive, and I've been working with HighFive for a long time. When somebody says, taking HighFive in Quest 2, good stuff. Okay, so how does this work? So HighFive is an organization that wants to create a really great environment. And how does that link into Sport for Life? Well, Sport for Life is the expert in the physiological changes of child development. And they're the experts of deciding when our children should engage in activity. And we want to get them in as early as we can and make sure they stay in for those positive reasons. This is just a really great example of how that works. So HighFive is the expert in emotional, mental, and social development for children ages 6 to 12. So you can see how these two marry. Sport is going to be the expert to physiological movement, and HighFive is going to make sure that those kids that are experiencing those sport environments and this physical activity is in an environment where they can thrive and they can feel safe and they can feel that their voice is heard. Sort of a child-first focus is what we say in HighFive. So HighFive is based on, it's a research-based program. It is based on research. Each principle, so some of this may be familiar, each principle and design guideline supports the healthy development of every child. For a child to thrive, HighFive ensures that every child's emotional and social need is considered. In HighFive, we talk about the principle of mastery, and this is the more intimate alignment with physical movement. It is important, when we look at mastery, it is important as it speaks to the ability of the individual child, not compared to the ability of the best athlete. And we're going to talk a little bit later about what's called mimicry and a little bit about what that looks like. But we don't want our children to compare themselves or draw some attention to that best player or that best athlete or that best artist in the room, or as that may that may create some low self-confidence and low self-efficacy in that child. But we want to make sure that we expose them to these in a natural way. Children are naturally looking at other children, and they know who the best ones are, and that's what mimicry is called. And we'll talk about that relationship between mastery, which is HighFive, and mimicry, which is physical literacy, a little bit later. The principle of a caring adult is also key, and every single one of you that are listening to us today is a caring adult. You're taking the time to figure out how to do a better job in our programs, how to take those programs to that next level so our kids have a better experience. So it's about really understanding that person that's interacting with those children. And research emphasizes the impact that that person in the front of the room has the most impact on those young people. And so we need to make sure that we are not only are we a trained adult, but that we also care about the children that we're taking care of, or the children that are in our programs. So why does quality matter in our programs? And when children have positive experiences, they're more likely to stay active for their entire life. We have so many young people dropping out of sport and recreation programs before they get out of childhood, and it's a crime, and it saddens me to think that these children are having experiences that are causing them to pull out. It's hard enough if you look at the barriers of the cost sometimes and the ability to get to recreation community centers and play spaces. To overcome those is hard enough, but our children are deciding not to play and not to participate because they're not having great experiences. And this is why quality matters so much. Research shows that if people have or children have a positive experience in sport, they're going to stay with us and they're going to stay active for life, and we want to make sure that we support that. So that's a little example of how HighFive and Sport for Life has come together as a relationship to support this movement. So the next 9 slides, and I'm going to go over these 9 slides in a bit of a high level. These are factors to consider when designing your physical literacy programs, when you're looking at the quality of the experience we're about to create. So I'm going to talk to you about a few key elements. You might want to just take some notes of the things I'm going to talk to you about. As I'm going to be a little bit off slide here, but all the key pieces will be on the slide deck that Jennifer will share with you after we're finished today. So number one, you probably heard me talk a little bit about this, which is movement vocabulary. Whoops, there you go. Movement vocabulary. We want all children to possess a large number of movement skills and certainly be competent in the basic land-based fundamental movement skills. What are movement skills for life? What are movement skills essential for life? We're talking right now about walking on ice, being able to walk through snow. I mean, these things are essential when you live in Canada, and I can assure you, moving from British Columbia to Toronto, it was definitely an interesting experience learning about these thing called ice storms and the snow that we get and black ice, which is things we just don't experience very often in British Columbia, and when we do experience them, we just get locked inside our homes. So understanding how to move on different surfaces. If you don't possess it, you won't go outside, or worse yet, you might get injured. And when we think about fundamental movement skills, we think about swimming, and we think about swimming as a key component. It's a life-saving skill that we need all of our people to have, especially our children. Swimming is critical, one, for our area here in Ontario and certainly across Canada. And it certainly would be if your work required you to swim. It's something that's really important. So movement vocabulary is also something that gets into vocation, gets into our jobs, gets into the work that we do. So movement vocabulary is a gateway to physical activity. We want our kids to understand what we're asking them. So I touched a little bit on this. It's certainly more than just sport. It is essential to convey that developing motor competence is not all about creating Olympic performance. Now, and that's, I think, a key part of this sport conversation. It's bigger than creating Olympic athletes. Although I think about my child, I think about all of our children, would we not want to give them the tools and the confidence to be able to be that best athlete if they wanted to, just like the way they do when we teach them the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s. Those children are able to write novels and biographies if they want to when they learn those skills. And we're talking about putting them on the same level with physical literacy, providing them the tools. So if they want to perform and they have the resources to do it, they'll be able to do it. We all need to be, or sorry, we don't all need to throw a javelin. I mean, it's not important that we all need to do that, although it is pretty fun. But we need to be able to learn how to throw and catch in our world. And I can assure you that there's been many times when I've been pegged off in my office by a throwing object to make me laugh, maybe in a stressful moment. And I think that, just a fun way to say we all need to be able to understand throwing and catching. And how many times are you flying out the door and somebody's throwing your car keys at you? We need these basic skills. We don't all need to master these movements, but we all need to have a basic level of competence. We all need to have a basic understanding of how to move our bodies. We need to be able to slip and regain control, which we call stumble and recover, is a critical skill to possess, along with the ability to fall correctly. We think about our senior citizens falling and breaking their hips. That is a life-threatening injury for them. And if we could increase their physical literacy through their lifespan, would we prevent the amount of falls? Because they would be able to manage falling much, much better. We all, and trust me, we all don't need to sprint as fast as the world champion, but we do all need to be able to run fast. And if you live in Toronto and you have to try to catch a streetcar, you know what I'm talking about. But these are truly important for life. So we talk a little bit about movement terminology. And for example, so what does this mean? So for example, if I say hop, you might think hop on one foot. But if I was to ask a child how to hop, they might consider a bunny, and a bunny hops on 2 feet. So it's really about understanding what this language means. It's difficult to play the piano without knowing the notes. We need our children to understand the language. When we ask them to hop, jump, leap, we need them to be able to understand what that is so they can go ahead and perform those movements. We talked a little bit about the difference between mastery and mimic when I was referring to the HighFive slides. And children are really good at mimics. Human beings are designed to mimic others, to look at others, to find out how we need to do what is asked of us. But this might not allow them to understand the movements and the language we use around movement. So it's really important that they have the ability to understand that language so they understand what we're asking them to. It is important to be consistent with this terminology and to show what you mean by the words you use. That way, when a child is mimicking what you do, they will be able to tell you what they're doing because they get how to go together and what you mean when you ask them to hop. So they just know the difference between hopping and jumping, and that's really important. And again, I reference it's really difficult to play the piano if you don't know the notes, and it's the same. It's difficult to move your body if you don't know the words. So I love this one, and I love this one so much because it really talks about failure as being okay. And we're having a bit of a crisis in our population with our young people going into colleges and universities and not being able to manage something called failure. Our school system has changed quite a lot, and the way we're exposing our children to those failures is changing. And I think this is a great environment for our children to learn how to fail and learn from that failure and not feel bad about it, but feel good about it. So this really is, so the fancy words we use for this is repetition-based learning with knowledge of results. It basically says that you're going to do something, you're going to get natural feedback from doing that activity or that movement, and you're going to learn how to adjust yourself to make it more successful the next time. We like to say that failure is a big part of learning and a big part of success. And that's something that we really want to think about in our programs is allowing our children to fail. And if you create these quality programs, you know that people can fail and still feel good about who they are. They might feel disappointed in that moment. But sometimes, you can't appreciate the sunshine until you can experience the rain. And this is a little bit about that, but in movement language. So if we look at trying a new skill, going up and down a ladder, so we're going to go up and down one of those sport ladders, very little instruction is needed. You can quickly show the kids how to do it, and they're going to go ahead and follow you. With each successful pass down the ladder, every time that child or yourself goes up that ladder, or a successful pass down that ladder, they typically reduce their own errors in the execution of that ladder by just knowing the results of their own performance. And this is what we allow for that failure piece. A quality experience creates circumstances where the children or adults can participate and practice the movements, not to perfect them, but to just practice them. Trial and error allows us to learn the mastery of those movements. We need to have repetitions to learn, and all people need to participate to learn, not just to select a few. We need to just not to select a few of those superstars in our programs. We need to have every child experience. There was a time when I worked in sport development at the Ontario Volleyball office here in Toronto, and I was involved in a program called Spikes, which is a developmental program for our children. And we used to go into elementary schools. Our coaches used to go into elementary schools, and we would ask the teacher, how many children do you have in your program? The teacher would say 30. So we would make sure our coaches showed up with 30 volleyballs. And for that 45-minute session, every child would have the ability to be on the ball the entire time in that program. And we would demo the activity, encourage them, walk around, give the children feedback while they're all having practice. And that's a really good example of repetition-based learning. And I compare that to being at my child's, and I understand that she's small and she's only 3.5, being at my school to pick up my child from a sports program that she wanted to go into with her friends, and they're all lined up, and there is one ball, and they're all taking one turn with that basketball. So compare that to how that looks in the environment. We're talking quality programming, and it blows my mind that these things still occur, and trust me, I certainly had a conversation with that coach. So just making sure that allowing our children to learn the movements on their own and learn how to teach themselves by that repetition learning, based learning with the knowledge of results. It's learning through doing is essentially what we're talking about here. How am I doing for time? Oh my gosh, this goes by so fast. So the next couple slides I'm going to go quickly. This is talking about speed. And for those of you who work in programs that are sport specific, we have a tendency to increase the speed. And what this slide is basically telling you about is it's important to be accurate first and speed second. We want to make sure that we can do it and we can do it correctly before we start to add that speed. Give those children an opportunity to feel the movement, go at their own pace before we start to add that speed pressure. So just keep those things in mind. This is a really interesting one when we look at our world today when we talk about peer pressure. Peer pressure certainly is something that we need to look at and to be controlled. Performance of movement, if we talk about peer pressure and movement, so if we're performing movement skills in front of others, that needs to be progressed. And if we're asking our young people to perform a skill, and I'll give you an example of that, perform a skill in front of others, that can make their learning ability and their confidence go way, way, way down. And if I put you all back in physical education class in high school, and again, I was a teacher for a short period of time. If you put yourself back in that environment, we would learn the skill, and then all of a sudden, it's just me with a badminton racket and a birdie, and they're asking me to call it a shuttlecock, which I could never do, but it's just me with a badminton racket and a birdie, and I have to try to get that birdie in the back two lines of the badminton court while the class watches me get a set. And how is that going to feel? How is that going to make me feel with my confidence level, and how is that going to make me feel with my performance? How is that going to affect my performance? It's about understanding our kids and what they can and can't handle and building progression to that. We call that in sport, we call that the audience effect. You put an audience, and that could be just a few people or a lot of people, could be detrimental and counterproductive of our children's learning. So understanding to get there really slowly. Hope you guys are all doing okay out there. It's so weird not to see your faces. I'm visualizing you all smiling and writing and being super interested. So we're talking now about time pressure, and this is really, really important. If for those of you who've done any sessions with me, you'll see how I sort of, through experience, so at this point, if you're in my space, I would take you through an activity and start to shorten the time I give you to be able to perform the task. Time pressure can be perceived a big stressor on our young people and ourselves as well. Think about how you feel with time pressure at work, where your boss comes in and says you need to have your budget finished by the end of the day and you haven't really updated it in the last few months. Some of you will thrive in that environment like I do, and some of you find it too stressful and you can't think clearly. Time pressure can be detrimental to our developing children, so to consider controlling that so the children don't feel rushed. So that does relate to a little bit of the speed we were talking about before. Give them the time to do it. And sometimes it's hard in our programs because we are bound by time commitments. So just be conscious of this. This is an interesting one when we talk about how we teach our children how to do a movement. If we look at the things we're doing, the language we use to talk to them, And what we want to emphasize is we want you to explain it, to demonstrate it, to let the children observe and to let yourself observe, and then correct as you go. But what I mean by correction, and this is something we really want to address, is you want to provide corrective cues to the child. And what children we don't want is for people to be yelling across a field or to be yelling across a space to get to the child that's on the other end, as that may make that child feel a little bit stressed out. We want to provide corrective cues in a personal way. You want to be close to the child, and you want to use words of support. We just don't want to be hearing you yell across the gym. And often, if you think about your own experiences, when we're yelling cues across the gym, you're not really sure if it's meant for you or not. You're not really sure. So observe those children and provide those corrective cues. Allow them the time to do it. So take a minute to review that slide as we talk about explain, demonstrate, observe, and correct. So when is the best time to provide the corrective cues? This next slide addresses that a little bit. What I want to point out here is that you don't want to be giving too much cueing when the person, the child or the adult, is learning a new movement. That could be counterproductive to that learning experience. We want to make sure we give them time to do it before you start to tell them if they're doing a good job or to correct their speed or their elbows or whatever it is you're asking them to do. We want to allow them to do it first, experience it before you start to give them cues and prompts in that personal space and in that interactive, intimate type of way. So just be really careful of that, and I can assure you sometimes we get so lost in the outcome. We want that child to learn that skill. We want them to learn it quickly because we know that, or we think that that child's going to feel so good that they've performed that skill. But we can't forget about the process it takes and that environment in which we need to get that child to that skill. So what does intentional physical literacy looks like? What does it look like? And I'm going to talk a little bit about mimicry. I introduced the concept before. So we are really, really, really very good at mimicking. If you think about yourself when you're out in your communities and you're out with friends, especially if you're trying a new activity or a new sport or even a new skill, you have a tendency to watch what other people are doing, and that's the way we learn. But mimicry can also show a lack of confidence in our kids. So it's about figuring out that balance between them being able to just do it on their own and having the confidence to try it, or holding back and waiting and watching others before that they engage. Essentially, when we're assessing physical literacy in children, we want to see them just want to go ahead and try it first and learn by doing, opposed to kind of standing back on the fringe and watching. There's sort of a balance between those two. But we're really, really good at mimicking for social reasons, for learning basic movements from parents. We learn about social behaviors, how to be in environments that are outside of our homes that is different than when you're inside of our homes. We won't talk about the things that happen in our own homes that could never happen outside our homes. But we learn this by watching others and experiencing how others do it. You can use mimicry to help people learn, but a mimic doesn't need to be an expert, and I think that's something we want to consider too. Sometimes if we get the most expert person in the room to show that task, that can actually create a little bit of inferiority in our children. So understand that just giving them the basic understanding of those movements really sets those kids up for success. You know, and as I talk about these slides and try to make them interesting for you, because they are important, I think I really wish I would have known this 15 years ago when I was responsible for teaching these young people how to play sport, which is something I am so passionate about. Inclusion is a word that's a buzzword today. We're talking a lot about it, talking a lot about how to get our young people involved. And inclusion also is for all populations, but when we look at physical literacy, it's really creating an environment where all can participate, where all are included. And the slide is going to talk to you a little bit about stations and how stations are really important as it allows a child to make choices. They can pick what station they start at. It reduces the amount of lineups. It allows children to try different tasks and different skills, and allowing them the variety of those activities. Some of them can be very, very physically active. Some can be a little bit lower key. But allowing that selection. Children need to be able to make their own choice. And it doesn't really matter what choice they make in the beginning of if you're doing some kind of a circuit. As that station, they feel good about that choice. And you know that they're going to have to do all the other stations that they go. My child's in a Montessori program, and there's particular stations that she really doesn't like, and she really feels that she's not very good as she's learning her ABCs or 1, 2, 3s. So she gets to choose when she does them, but she has to do them at some point during her lesson period. And it's really interesting. I was observing her recently. It's really interesting watching her go to the activities that she's best at first. And the environment allows that. She goes to the activities she's best at first, builds her confidence, and eventually she'll get to those activities where she's starting to learn how to recognize her numbers 1 to 9. She can do it. She just doesn't have the confidence yet to do it. So she gets to choose one. And that's really important. I can assure you, when I worked in recreation, we didn't always give our young people the choices. We would plan our programs. They would be heavily planned. I would be turning them in. My staff would be turning them in to me, and they'd be amazing, full of activities. And I'm visualizing sweaty, dirty kids at the end of the day. Yet where in that day is the time for those children to make some choices? So make sure you take a look at what you're doing this summer for those of you who are about to embark on hiring and planning for summer and incorporating that place every day for all children to make those choices. I love this one, and I think sometimes we get wrapped up with equipment. And the way physical literacy, the best way to teach physical literacy often is in environments that don't include equipment. So I want to talk about what fundamental movement skills, a little bit about what they are, because we've talked a little bit about them, and how they can be best taught. And oftentimes it's in an environment where you just need a floor and a human. So when we look at fundamental movement skills like running, jumping, landing on 2 feet, there's many activities you could probably think of right now off the top of your heads that kids could experience without a ton of fancy equipment. Crossovers, skipping, galloping, hopping, jumping, overhand throwing, a basic ball for that, striking with a stick. This is also language that is in the physical education and health curriculum in our school system. So striking with a stick, you need a basic stick and a ball. Not every child needs to have a bat. Hand dribbling, kickball, foot dribbling, balance walking forwards, and balance walking backwards. So take a look at your programs, and there's ways to increase these activities while using little equipment. And I know that many of our budgets are super tight, so being ability to have that flexibility to not have that equipment. You know, it's interesting, as I tell you this, I was talking to a colleague of mine just yesterday, and she was saying that the district that her child is about to embark in his school career, he's going to be starting kindergarten, they're not allowed to play tag. And when I look at the activity tag, if you break down tag, think about all of the fundamental movement skills that are learned when you have an open space and a whole bunch of kids. And I just think it's an absolute disservice to those children that we have removed that. We really need to think about the decisions that we're making and the impact and the consequences of those decisions. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. You're doing a very good job of hanging in, and you better all be listening and not averting your eyes onto other interesting things. So we're almost there, so hang in there with me. Next, we talk about these components about small-sided games, and many of you will be very familiar with this. Talking about, there's tons and tons of resources online. So go ahead and Google small-sided games. I'm constantly Googling that, and there's lots and lots of games. One of my favorite activities, I have no idea what it's called, but it's where a whole bunch of kids, we're learning the physical, we're learning through the activity of soccer. And what they're doing is they're playing about 5 or 6 different soccer games in one big field where all the kids are interacting, but only 3 kids are shooting on one net, and there's about 6 different nets. Everybody's moving. There's about 4 or 5 balls on the field, and all the kids are sweating and moving and getting a ton of time on task and experiencing. So small-sided games. But the key with these small-sided games is doing them with purpose, making sure that you have an intent that you're doing this. Everybody's included, and you've selected the physical literacy that you want to be facilitated in this. It's also important to create an environment where kids can feel safe, to be creative, to try lots of new things, and to be challenged in that environment. Confidence is such an important piece of this puzzle. We use in physical literacy, we use a juggling activity to be able to help people understand how we can build confidence and movement skills in the same environment. But it's really important that we do this with intent. Confidence is built on fun and challenging experiences with successes and failures. So really important to consider that there. Failure needs to occur, because if you fail and then you succeed from that failure, you're certainly going to learn, and you're going to feel good about that learning. So I'm just going to skip through a couple of slides here. So bear with me as I will explain that slide in a minute. I want to say this slide here talks about the audience and making sure that we gradually improve that audience, as adding people watching kids move has a tendency to make to drop a child's confidence as well as our own. And a good experience I had with this audience piece is when in elementary school we learned how to do actually a public speaking contest, and we learned doing it in small groups, and they vote on which one they like best, and then you get to graduate to doing it in front of a bigger group, and then you go to your whole class, and eventually I was in the finals against my entire school and parents. But by the time I got in front of my entire school and parents, I had already practiced it so many times that I was expecting, and I knew what it was going to feel like for me, and I knew how to manage my nerves. And it's the same if you put that in a physical activity environment, to make sure you add that slowly. Each person needs to find their own shoes, have some time to figure out their own shoes, and use their own shoes. Give them time to be able to experience those activities before they start showing off. I'm going to talk about this in its entirety. The slide will keep coming up. I'll show you in a minute. Here it is now. Sorry, here it is now. So basically what it is, we talked in the beginning about confidence, motivation, participation, and competence as the core pieces of physical literacy. We need to make sure we add in successes and failures, and we need it to be challenging, and we need it to be fun. And when you see it all together, you can see that this takes time. We have a tendency to just put this all in at the same time in our programs. So when you see it all together, understand that this takes a long time to create the competence and the confidence in our kids before they start to add that audience piece, before we add that audience piece where they can start to show off those movements, where they can start to show others, to watch me, to look at me, to show strangers the skills they've looked at so hard, they've watched, so they've practiced so much. This slide was competition, and I find this is where I wish you were all with me, because I'd love to have a conversation with you about competition, and feel free to send me any questions that you have in regards to this piece. But we need to progress this slowly. We need to teach kids how to do this slowly. If you think about 8 and 10-year-old boys, and think about it, an 8 and 10-year-old boy, a typical boy, and their behaviors when they lose a game, and their behaviors when they win a game. Do they win with grace? Do they win with humility? Do they show appreciation to the non-successful player or team? And do they lose with dignity? Do they lose with self-respect? Do they lose with admiration of others? And the answer is no, they don't, because they haven't learned to. Some of these boys and girls as well that we see, I use the 8 and 10-year-old boys not because I'm picking on them, just because it's a little easier for you to understand the behavior I'm trying to show. Competition is not two-sided. It's not as, or it is two-sided, sorry. It's not as easy as yes or no. We need to make sure that we gradually incorporate these into our programs and have children learn how to lose, learn how to win, and learn how to perform. So making sure we take that into account. We don't want to get into games too fast. You know, there was a survey done a while ago, and it asked children, what are the number one reasons children participate in sport and recreation? And they were fun, and they were friends. And that's why the number one was actually friends. I want to play with my friends in a sport and recreation environment, and it feels good to get sweaty and move my body. And then we asked those same kids, what happens, like, why are you dropping out? What do you think is going to cause you to not want to participate in sport? And the number one reason is it's too competitive and it's not fun anymore. And we know from that research that children would much rather play on a losing team than sit on the bench of a winning team. And we need to make sure that we understand that. The last one I'm going to reference before I shut her down, and I'm pretty impressed with my timing. Jennifer, make sure you reflect this in my evaluation. But is right and left symmetry. When we're training our kids, we have a tendency to only focus on the dominant arm. And when we are born, we are able to use the dominant and non-dominant dominant hand and leg as equal as others. But as we go older, society and just the way we learn in the environments we're in has a tendency to create an unequal balance between our left and our right sides. If I was to ask you to take your non-dominant hand and practice your signature or your initial, it's going to feel a little bit awkward. It's going to feel a little bit out of place. And it might not look the way you want it to look. But if you practice that 20 times, 30 times, and you practice that every day, you may not be super proficient at it because you're starting a little later. This is why we have to include these skills early on. But if you keep practicing and practicing and practicing, at some point, your signature or your initial will be, you'll feel pretty confident about it, and it'll look a lot different than it did the first time you did it, because our bodies have the ability to learn if we're putting them in environments. We want to make sure that we give our young people a chance to use their right and left side. And I can assure you this is actually a very significant piece when we talk about injury prevention. We want to make sure our left side of our bodies and our right side of our bodies are equal. So we have our balance in our knee strength and our back strength. We want to have good core strength. We want to make sure that we have a good balance as we get older. So I'm going to end there. And I'm going to tie it off, and I think that there's, okay, so Jennifer's going to give you a bunch of resources. Sarah, I see you asked about resources. There are an amazing amount of resources at Sport for Life. So Canada Sport for Life, if you Google Canada Sport for Life, there are tons and tons and tons of resources for you to talk about how to speak with parents. I want to assure you that the Sport for Life community, I'm going to be traveling around Ontario with my Sport for Life colleagues teaching this exact material to our parents over the next little bit, mostly in Toronto for sure. So you can talk to the Sport for Life Society if you're interested in having our team come out and talk to your parents. And we make it interactive, and we encourage them to experience what these pieces are. So today I just talked to you about them. But in a live session, we would actually have everyone there experience it, just like we do in a lot of our Parks Rec, our HighFive programs, things like that. So Jennifer's loading up a whole bunch of videos for you. There is a ton of videos. There's some really funny ones from kids sport about how physical literacy is the key to life. So if you Google kids sports commercial, you're going to see some pretty good ones there, which add some humor. So I'm going to end there. I just want to say thank you all for listening. Thank you all for taking the time to receive and consider this information. We're in a really scary situation with our young people today. We have a serious problem with inactivity, which is causing so many effects. And we like to say we have an inactivity problem, not an obesity problem. And we really need to look at that. So good luck out there. I don't know, Jennifer, if you want to wrap it up now. And just thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And if everyone wants to join me in the chat, just saying thank you. That was a great presentation, and you did wonderful on time, so that's definitely going in the evaluation. I know it's a lot of content. I know it's tough, but that's also why we're going to make this available to everyone afterwards. I'll send an email out with a link to the recording and to the PowerPoint deck. And I know that you're always welcome. You always welcome questions, which is great. So
yeah, feel free to add my email to everybody.
Sure, totally. I will do that. And also, we're going to send out an evaluation, and so please feel free to give us your feedback. Again, this is a project that was funded through a grant. Therefore, any feedback that we get really helps at providing that feedback to the government in order to get, further funding for more opportunities like this in the future. So please do take a moment to fill out that evaluation that I'll send out shortly. So thank you to everyone who's joined us today on Friday. I hope you found this information useful, and that, again, if you need any further questions, or if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact Sarah and I. Okay? Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.